It's been called the Good War,
I knew instantly we were in trouble, just instantly.
a conflict that raged from the fields and skies of Europe to the jungles and beaches of the South Pacific.
Go for broke, meaning we're going to get out there and fight until we won or we died.
Against the fascist powers of Germany, Italy, and Japan, the United States stood as defender of liberty and democracy throughout the world.
Are created equal.
To feel so vulnerable, I think that we can understand the fears that drove some of this.
But from the moment the first bombs dropped on Pearl Harbor, one group of Americans came under suspicion and was ultimately asked to surrender the very liberty that America was defending in countries across the globe.
If you're General DeWitt, who believed that all Japanese were dangerous, then all the Japanese were going to be moved.
Though all that remains of the Japanese-American internment camps are rusting barbed wire fences and crumbling foundations, those camps still exist in the memories of Americans who remember World War II as a lesson in loyalty. Meet Masaji Inashita. His friends call him Mas. He's nearly 90 years old, but he still gets around.
I'm sorry.
Mas is a man with a story to tell.
We'll pay you $20,000.
From classrooms to conference centers to neighborhood libraries, over the last 3 decades, it's a story he's told to nearly 30,000 people.
Hey, what's the matter with you, man? Get real.
But he isn't done yet. Because Mas tells his story in the hope that the injustices of the past won't be repeated in the future.
I knew instantly we were in trouble. Just instantly. I said, well, the Japanese attacked Pearl Harbor.
The mad Japanese dog strikes in the Pacific, and Washington State Department gives the incredible news to reporters who had been awaiting news of peace negotiations with the sly, war-crazed Japs.
I'll bet you, I said, they're going to be coming against my parents and maybe even me.
Up and down the West Coast, the slogan of the day is, "Watch those Japs."
Within 5 days after the war started, the FBI is looking for my father. They found him at breakfast and they told him to come forward. They didn't tell him to pack a suit of clothes. They didn't tell him where they were taking him. They didn't tell us why he was being arrested. Yet we knew he was connected with the war.
But the challenges confronting Japanese Americans began 50 years before Pearl Harbor.
My father came as a trained sumo wrestler. Can you imagine somebody that's only about 5'9", 220 pounds of just plain iron? He was a very strong person. But he came as an adventurer. He was going to challenge everybody over here that's Japanese in sumo and make a lot of money. But he said when he got here, he changed his mind. He said, I'll never go back to Japan. He said, this is where I'm going to make my stand, because look, he says, the miles and miles of virgin land at that time. He came in 1900. Virgin land that's available. And I'm going to learn how to farm this land.
Though he would eventually learn to farm land in America, Mas's father would never own that land. Anti-alien legislation, later upheld by the United States Supreme Court in 1922, was enacted in an effort to keep the Japanese immigrants in their place as a source of cheap labor by denying them the opportunity to become naturalized American citizens. In an attempt to eliminate potential competition for land and resources, laws were also passed limiting the ability of non-citizens to own or lease land and businesses.
The various state laws began to come into focus, particularly because these immigrants, after they worked off their indentureship, was beginning to go into the land picture as trying to buy land and settling in as farmers on the western United States.
In California, they became very good at farming land that was seen as not that fertile. They would take land and they would irrigate it, and they would developed strategies that worked to allow vegetables and flowers and strawberries to grow on land that other farmers might have just easily dismissed.
These state laws were very restrictive, and every few years there'd be more restrictions passed on how the Japanese got a hold of land. And for the longest time, it was leasing the land. They could lease the land for considerable periods of time, and then the state laws began to change, where the lease period was reduced from 50 years to 15 years to 10 years. Finally, it got down to about 3 years' time, and it was very difficult to work under such circumstances.
But despite those limitations, the Japanese immigrants, like all American pioneers, found a way to succeed in a hostile environment.
In 1941, the income of all of the crops and fruit production in western United States and Arizona was around $850 million a year, which is considerable when you consider that particular time and period. And 85% of that amount was produced by Japanese.
Although many had achieved a measure of financial success, after Pearl Harbor, the immigrant Japanese and their American-born children were seen by their neighbors and their government as potential spies for an enemy nation.
Today's threat to our national security is not a matter of military weapons alone. We know of new methods of attack. The Trojan horse, the fifth column that betrays a nation unprepared for treachery. Spies, saboteurs, and traitors are the actors in this new strategy.
And that fear was really justified. I mean, you know, to suddenly be attacked out of a period of isolationism, to feel so vulnerable. I think that we can understand the fears that drove some of this. And that's where we see the politics come into play, where we see local racial prejudice affect policy, affect the Army's decisions, affect the President's decisions.
And your media, even locally, would say, oh, well, we don't know these people. They speak a foreign language. We don't know these people. They stick to themselves.
And this happens, you know, early on, beginning in January, where that anti-alien movement really rises up, particularly in California, but in many of the western states. And people are saying, we cannot trust these people. They might be potential spies. We must remove all of them from the West Coast. Now, J. Edgar Hoover of the FBI, who we know is very security conscious, and some people might say paranoid, actually tells the president, we've already arrested suspect people. We've already removed them. We don't need to remove ordinary citizens. Nonetheless, under political pressure, Franklin Roosevelt signs Executive Order 9066.
And this executive order gave the right to the military commander of each military district the right to examine, the right to assess, the right to remove any and all persons whom they considered dangerous. Well, if you're General DeWitt, who believed that all Japanese were dangerous, then all the Japanese were going to be moved. He divided Washington in half, Oregon in half, and California down Highway 99, and included the southern third of Arizona, which totaled to about 120,000 Japanese out of 135,000 total in the United States.
And this does not specify people of Japanese ancestry. It specifies people who might be potential security risks must be removed from these military zones.
The private papers of then United States Attorney General Francis Biddle clearly reveal that the intended targets of the relocation from the West Coast were solely the members of the Japanese community.
And so it clearly becomes an issue And I won't just say of race because I think that's too simplistic, but I think it's a combination of economics, politics, and race. Because if you look at where those military zones are drawn, and you look at the areas in which the Japanese are removed, it opens up the possibility of other agribusinesses or farms coming in and taking over the land that the Japanese American farmers had cultivated.
Whatever the motivation for the evacuation of the Japanese community from the West Coast, once the order was given, the relocation of over 100,000 American residents was completed with military efficiency. This was due in part to the Japanese themselves, many of whom believed that the best way to assist their country in a time of war was to submit to General DeWitt's evacuation orders without question.
And every few days he would activate a evacuation order, and he would define by street and district how these people were going to behave. And they were given instructions that they could take to camp what they could carry in their two hands.
Now imagine this, particularly if you're a young family and you have children. You know, if one arm's for a baby, you only have one arm to carry something else.
Facing an uncertain future and instructed to transport only what they could carry, the Japanese Americans were forced to sell possessions that had taken decades to acquire, with no guarantee of receiving the full value of those possessions.
And so, faced with all this uncertainty, some people looked to friends to store things, some people entrusted belongings to people they thought would look after them, but many people also had to sell items as well.
It's a kind of a sad story, in the sense that before we got to this camp situation, I had to reduce our possession from what we had, and to reduce it down to the point where I could go to camp with what I could carry in my two hands. Now, you know, I'm no giant and I can only carry so much. I had to get rid of a bunch of horses. My father loved horses, and farming was done with horses in those days. People are calling me on the phone. Hey, you have a lot of horses. How much you want for your best team? I know my father paid $800 for the best teams, and I'm saying, well, will you pay half, $400? Hey, what's the matter with you, man? Get real. You're going to camp in 3 days. And I said, well, no, okay. How much you offer? And they began to offer ridiculous prices. From there on, it was disaster. $50 for a team of horses, $25, and I'm throwing in the hay to make a sale. So you can imagine the feelings that goes through me, because I'm giving away all my father's things for peanuts. Every day there would be train loads going, bus loads going to some camp. There were 10 of these camps, 2 in California, 2 in Arkansas, 1 each in Utah, Idaho, Colorado, and Wyoming, and 2 in Arizona.
Arizona was the only state that actually had the 2 camps on 2 separate reservations.
One in Poston, which was the largest camp of all, which was the 3rd largest city in the state of Arizona, and the other one was located in a place called Rivers, which is on the Secretone Indian Reservation, and that was the 4th largest city in Arizona.
It's important to realize that both of the communities at first refused. They did not want to be a part of this internment. They didn't want these camps on their land. In some cases, it was because they said, you know, you removed us to these reservations. We can't participate in the removal of these people. In some cases, it was sort of like, well, if you're saying these people are suspect, why do we want them, you know, next door and on our land? But the Army was very forceful, and in the case of Gila River, they didn't really listen, and after the council said no twice, they just went ahead and started building.
And you know, 65 years ago, all we knew about Arizona was a land of cowboys and Indians. and the Indians were getting slaughtered by the cowboys. And so immediately the mind breaks into thinking, and it says, they're taking us to some deserted spot, and they're going to shoot us all and bury us in a hole. I mean, this is the kind of thinking that goes through your mind under circumstances like that. The Gila River campsite, or Rivers, Arizona, as it was called, had red roofs, actually double roofs, and the buildings were oyster painted colored sheetrock type of building instead of chicken wire and black paper. I mean, this was a nice looking camp. And we thought, man, this looks nice. In fact, I remember saying, it looks better than the place we used to live in. I remember coming up this very road, approaching the campsite. When the war started, there was about 7,000 acres out here to the east of us. And this land was developed and ready to go. And that they thought that was an ideal reason to bring these people here. Right next door, every so many feet, there'd be a new barrack, you know, another barrack. And there was 6 in this row here and 7 in this row here. The barracks here was called the rec room, and then it started 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, and then 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, and 14, and 15, and then the mess hall.
And so, 10 relocation camps became communities, American communities.
And in many ways, you see that they really are American. They go to school like any other kid does. They're participating in baseball.
First off, if you were an immigrant from Japan, the only job you can do was go out to the farm. Otherwise, they gave you no jobs, no dishwashing jobs, no night watchman jobs, no position of responsibility was given to an immigrant. You had to be an American born. Well, you were offered jobs that ranged from $14 to $19 a month. $14 was probably wiping the tables off or some very simple operation. And a cook would receive $16 a month, but if you're a chef, you got $19. School teachers got $19, and people who were dentists and doctors got $19 a month. About 100 of us volunteered to pick cotton. And we left camp every morning, 4:30 in the morning, we were leaving camp, went to pick cotton. I made about $3.15 a day picking cotton. And occasionally I'd be the top picker and they'd give me a bonus of $3. And so there were several times and I got a little over $6, which was good money compared to $16 a month. Meanwhile, the Army recruiters come by, and they're looking for people who could read and write and speak Japanese. And they came to Gila River, and they begged for us. And I thought, well, I went to Japanese school a long time, 10 years in fact. I could speak good Japanese.
Moss and thousands of other young internees faced a difficult decision, whether to stay confined in camp or leave to fight for the country that had placed them there.
I graduated with technician 5th grade, which is 2 stripes with a T in it. 150 of us from this school. We could have been sent overseas, but they couldn't get us overseas. Our Liberty ships weren't ready, so they sent us as Company S to Shelby, Mississippi to train with the 442. The 442nd Infantry Regiment was born when the Army decided that this large pool of people are being wasted in these 10 camps.
New manpower for Uncle Sam's Army. In relocation centers which have housed Japanese Americans for nearly a year, new special combat units are being organized. A War Department ruling covers American citizens of Japanese ancestry, a potential force of 23,000.
And they began to draft these people Eventually, over 30,000 persons of Japanese ancestry served in the military. Can you imagine, out of the Rivers camp of 13,000, almost 1,500 youngsters served in World War II. 22 are KIAs. One of those 22 is a Congressional Medal of Honor winner. And immediately the Army saw that these were unusual people. And their motto was go for broke. Meaning we're going to get out there and fight until we won or we died.
Returning from 3 years of war service in Italy and France, the 442nd Combat Team receives a rousing welcome at New York. The veteran unit is made up of Japanese Americans, many from Hawaii. The hard-fighting combat team battled heroically through such tough assignments as Anzio and Cassino and is returning minus 1 battalion. Its bulldog determination is expressed in its slogan, "Go for broke," meaning shoot the works.
Out in the Pacific, there were 6,000 more persons of Japanese ancestry fighting the Japanese directly, being language persons, being people who translate, people who did interpretation work. Can you imagine these people serving in the Pacific, fighting in Guadalcanal, or even up in Dutch Harbor in Alaska? These are the people that kept the information going. We interrogated prisoner after prisoner after prisoner. If there was 4 or 5 in the group, and I'm talking to them, I'd slip them, hey, take a deck of cards. You can't believe, the response I used to get. And my partner used to say, oh, you're just wasting your money, you're only making $54 a month. How come you keep, spending it on this kind of stuff? But I got 3 times the information he got.
Nisai marched smartly onto the ellipse near the White House, where President...
And the aides to President Truman said, it's raining. Don't you think we ought to postpone this? And President Truman said, no, after what these men have been through, a little rain isn't going to hurt me. And what did he say? You fought
not only the enemy, but you fought prejudice, and you've won. Keep up that fight, and we'll continue to win. To make this great republic stand for just what its Constitution says it stands for, the welfare of all the people, all the time.
These soldiers, true Americans.
And the thing is this, they're the ones that changed the opinion of the American people. The American people up to now had been saying, those Japs, what about them? They weren't too sure who we were or what we were. But with a record of the 442 being broadcast out by the nations and its press, people began to say, hey, what have we got their parents, their brothers and sisters are incarcerated behind barbed wire? Can't we make an adjustment?
All veterans returning home from war suffer the challenges of rebuilding a life interrupted by conflict. Japanese Americans were no different. Moss was certain he would return home to act as head of the Inashta family, but circumstances had changed in his absence.
My father had gotten tired of waiting for me, had given the right of the head of the family to my sister, who had long been 21 years of age. And so, rather than try to contest the position, I immediately became an itinerant worker. And when I got enough together, I started my own farm.
Moss's Arizona farming operations never matched the level of success he experienced before the war, and he found himself spending hours at the Rivers campsite shedding tears for a life that had been taken from him.
But I began to realize that the more I came up here and started crying, the more I was getting rid of, those bad parts.
By purging the pain of his past through storytelling, Masaji Nashita has found a way to teach all of us his lessons in loyalty.
The thing about Japanese American internment is a lesson for posterity to understand that we shouldn't let it happen again.
Today, after 9/11, we see this reaction. We see understandable fear, but then we see it being taken out against people who can be racially identified as different.
We should be very careful to avoid repeating this process.
When in fact what we really share in common is not how we look, not what we believe in terms of our religious faith. It's that we're all committed to the Constitution. We're all protected by it, and that's also something we all agree as citizens to protect.
Which indicates to the society around me that we are integrating into this whole community and we are being accepted. And that is a big change from the time we spent behind barbed wires because we look like the enemy. Okay? We look like the enemy. Thank you for your time.